closer look, as we're calling them, which is the Q&A portion of the Art of Pricing Profitably. Hopefully by this chance you have not only watched part 1 and part 2, but also had a chance to download the spreadsheets and work with the numbers. Now, I am recording this, so again, if you have any further questions, need to follow up and review some of the questions that were answered today, we will send you the link to that. And I'm going to go through the questions that were posted in advance on the forums and through emails and during the first 2 sessions. Those will be posted on the screen. If you have any additional questions or follow-up questions to what is being responded to, feel free to either use the chat or the Q&A function, whichever is easier for you and easier for you to find. Now that being said, we're going to get started. Sean is here and he is going to answer the questions for you. I'm going to go ahead and move to the first question. And it was one that was asked repeatedly during the webinar. It was, how many employees are in your shop? Because people had a lot of questions about, you know, okay, that makes sense for you, but what about my size shop? Sean?
Hi, everybody. How you doing? So I missed the first part of this, and I just want to say if anybody has any more questions, you can type them in as we're going. But anyway, so my shop, including, there's 2 different numbers I'm going to give you. So there are 7 people who are billable hour people. And that is people who work in production, work in finish, and work in install. And that's including subcontractors. I have a subcontractor that does some finishing. I have a subcontracting crew for installs, not all of them, but some of them. And I believe if you remember one part of it, I said Mark was a half a person. So, but the reality is we have 10 people, including myself, John, and Mark. So 10 people total, 7 people that I figure calculations on for doing hourly rates. And with that said, that's actually, I don't even know if this question was answered, but there was a lot of stuff jammed in 2 sessions there. There's going to be a minimum for every company. For my company, I'm actually at my absolute minimum right now. So if I were to have less employees or less work, I would actually start losing money. And when I say by losing money is I would be making no actual true profit, and I would be eating into those, recouping the funds to reinvest back in the shop. I'd still make my payroll, or excuse me, I'd still make my personal payroll. I'd still cover all my bills, but that's my minimum. And that was the whole concept of taking the spreadsheet and breaking out what it costs to open your doors first before you actually do any work, because every company, you need to figure out what's the minimum amount of work that you need to do in a year. And then obviously based on what that is, there's going to be a minimum amount of people you need to do that. So every company is going to be different, but every company is going to be more than you think. It's going to be more difficult, much more difficult for a 1 to 3 person shop to actually turn a profit because of all that overhead costs. With that said, the opposite goes into effect because there are 3 fixed amounts of money. So your fixed operating expenses before you open are going to remain the same. When you do more work, your rent stays the same, your lighting stays the same, all that kind of stuff stays the same. Your owner salary is going to remain the same, and your reinvestment back in the shop are going to remain the same. So as you add more employees, you're actually able to make more money.
That makes sense, Sean, and thank you. It's probably a whole nother presentation of itself, you know, the best way to maximize employees and minimize costs. So
Correct. Yep.
Great. Next question is a rather longer one, but I'll read through it. And it says about replacement costs for all machinery. What is the actual cost divided in 60 months? So how do you calculate current payment that they have on the machine? For example, there's a $2,000 lease to buy payment on a CNC machine, and it's included in the overhead calculation. Do I need to include another payment on top of that? And if yes, my overhead may be too high.
So the answer to that or any other question is you need to account for everything once, not twice. And you don't account for anything, you don't double bill for anything. but you also don't leave anything off. So to answer that question, the way I presented the presentation was if you had no loans or lease payments and everything was already paid off, which is the situation for myself. So the difference would be is if you are currently making a lease or you have a loan payment, you would take that dollar amount, you would take it off of that 60-month depreciation sheet, and you would move that into that first spreadsheet, which is your bills before you open the door. And the reason you want to do that is because you need to account for flow times, or if you have a shutdown, you're still going to be responsible for those payments. You need to make sure that you're making that in your absolute minimum payment. And then the other side of that coin is when you have finished paying off a machine, or you make all your lease payments and your final payment, you now own it. You want to move, you don't want to delete it off the sheet. You want to move it from that tab back onto the other sheet of items that are previously paid off. So either way, it's covered. You never want to, this is the problem, and this is what I was trying to explain at the beginning, why this is different than working off your tax returns. The problem with your tax returns is once you've written a machine off, whether it's 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, once it's written off, it's no longer on your schedule of write-offs. And so on paper, it may look like you're making money, but that money is being temporary because if you're not billing for it, you're not getting that money in, and eventually you're going to need to either do a major maintenance or a replacement on that machine.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sean. That makes sense about, the actual cost and depreciation and monthly payment. So thank you very much.
And actually, I want to follow up on that. Another thing that would typically come up on would be on vehicles. Whether you have a payment plan on a vehicle or you have a lease, you would want to take your total payments schedule and spread that over 5 months. Some people might have a 3-year note on a vehicle. You want to take your down payment and the 3-year total payments and spread that over the 60 months. That would be for a vehicle, so that would be the same thing.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question, still about replacement value, but how do you figure the cost of the building?
So for me, I am renting a building. Part of my rent payment is the landlord has insurance to pay for the actual cost of the replacement of the building. With that said, I also have insurance that covers the cost of the replacement of the actual shell of the building. I already have insurance covering a fire loss because I would need obviously to any equipment I had, anything that was on the floor, work in progress, and inventory would need to be replaced. And we'd also need to replace all the infrastructure, all the manpower that would go into wiring and everything like that. So I actually have an additional $400,000 on my policy to cover the actual shell, because even though the landlord has an insurance policy to cover the shell should something out of my control happen, I need to cover it because I would be liable for it if we had an incident that we were responsible for. We would actually need to replace that cost. And if you own the building, then that's easy enough to figure out. Your insurance company is going to come out and do an evaluation on your building. And if they haven't done so, it certainly is going to go for if you have a loan. If you own a building and it's already been paid off, then you would want to get, if you don't have the ability to do it yourself, get a third-party evaluator to value a full replacement of the shell of the building. You definitely need to account for that.
Okay, thank you, Sean, for clarifying renting versus owning too. That really does it's a big difference, obviously. So, okay, next question. This was asked several times actually about rework. How do you track, estimate, and calculate rework?
This goes to say with a lot of questions, a great answer. When I originally did this course, this was the design as a 6-hour workshop. So we actually went through and explained all of this in much more detail. We did it hands-on with everybody. So everybody, just like I said, you need to go, all those tabs, you need to go out and figure out how much you have invested in your shop, how many hours you put in, what your worth is. You need to track hours. If you haven't done so already, you need to start doing that immediately. We keep it pretty simple. I have the guys track hours in 15-minute increments, and they write it in during lunchtime at the end of the day, what they're working on, what the project was and what they're working on. I break it down into a couple of different primary processing, secondary processing, that goes for sheet goods and hardwoods. And I have finished prep, finishing, and installation. I have shop, anything to do with shop, and that would be cleaning a floor or unloading a truck or something like that. I don't do it so much now because we did it for so many years. I had a really good handle on what it was, and we just keep making improvements. So I don't break it down into that kind of minutia any longer until there's actually a mistake happens. So you need to track your hours. You need to hit those benchmarks. And remember what I was saying about tracking the weekly benchmark number, that you're getting that out there. I don't actually evaluate the time unless we dip down below those numbers, because as long as we're above those numbers, I know we're producing. Unless my production manager tells me, you know, there was a major mistake, and we take a look at that. But I don't actually separately break out rework unless it is a rework because of a client issue. If it's a mistake we made, it's kind of irrelevant to me. We have to remake it. I don't need to track it because it's a loss. I'm not going to make it up anywhere. I do need to track it because I want to do what we can in the future to make sure that it doesn't happen again. I hope that makes sense. If it's not, whoever typed that out can ask a follow-up question to that if that didn't explain it. But I don't actually track separately rework. We track. When I first started doing this is going back to 2002, where I started developing this tracking hours. We tracked hours for 3 years, from 2002 to 2005. And then once my estimates were basically within 2% of actuals, we no longer needed to worry about tracking actual hours, because I knew that right now we're either meeting or beating everything unless there's a mistake.
Thank you, Sean. And I do think this topic in particular is highlighted quite a bit in our follow-up webinar, which is about job costing.
Correct. Yeah, that's definitely a webinar you're going to want to attend after this one.
Yep. I'll send that link out after this again. So, all right, next question. This is particular for an S Corp. The general liability insurance is a function of total sales, as is workman's comp. What would you recommend? How would you recommend accounting for that?
I'm sorry, I'm reading the question again to make sure I understand it.
Okay, for the S Corp, the general liability insurance is a function of total sales, as is the workman's comp. How would you account for that?
So on the different spreadsheets, so we're an LLC. It's a difference with an S Corp. I've never been an S Corp, so I don't understand quite what the differential is. But there's still going to be amounts covering that, and that they're going to be put in on the spreadsheets. In my spreadsheet, I had the payroll. I actually had one lump sum, if you remember, at the top, that accounted for all the costs involved, including the workman's comp. And I pay a separate general liability policy for a different insurance company. It doesn't matter how you account for it. It matters that you do account for it. Whatever your insurance holder is, if you have a single insurance holder for all of your general liability, your vehicle, your workman's comp, and then everybody should have, I didn't mention that, I have an additional umbrella policy of $2 million that covers all those policies under one. Your insurance company should be giving you a breakdown of that, and you would just break those, costs down into those additional, those separate cells for that. It doesn't matter, basically, it doesn't matter where you account for it on those spreadsheets and in your numbers. It matters that you do account for those as part of your sales costs. They are part of your sales costs, and they need to be reduced. If that doesn't answer the question, if that person had asked that wants to follow up in more detail now, or if you'd like to follow up with me in the forum or direct, I'd be more than happy to do that. My email is sean@millworkandmore.com, and if you've got a pencil, I'll write down my cell phone number. It's 973-670-1939 if anybody wants to follow up and a little bit more direct. I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure if it did.
Thanks, Sean. I think it does, because the point is, just account for it however you do, as long as it's in there.
Correct. Like I said, on my sheet, all my employee costs I put into one lump number because I work with that PEO. they do give me a breakdown sheet, but all I care about is the bottom line. Every 2 weeks, I get X amount of money taken out of my account. I just multiply that times 26. That's my yearly cost, and it accounts for all my tax liabilities for the employees, the employee gross payroll, the HR charge that they charge me, and the workman's comp is all in there. And then I have my liability and vehicle and umbrella is broken out separately.
All right, sounds great. Next question. And this was answered in the forums, but if you want to answer it here too, just so we record it twice, the name of your payroll company and how you, what you explained in the forums was how you found that specific company.
Yeah, so I don't even remember how I first heard about that concept, but when I did, I Google searched it, and I like finding a PEO. As Amanda mentioned, I actually put a link in the forum in that one topic there. It's actually a search finder. So what you want to do is you don't want to actually call individual companies. There are third-party aggregators of sites, and they will take down, they're going to ask you generic questions: where you're located, what your field is, how many employees you have, what's your yearly payroll. They're going to send that, and they're going to send that out to bid to multiple companies. They're going to save you all that time. It costs you nothing, absolutely nothing to do this. There's no extra fees involved. There's no contract to sign. If you decide not to go with it, there's no obligation whatsoever. But they will actually send it out to bid, and some companies every company is going to have different requirements as far as minimum payroll, and they're going to have minimum on payroll. Not every company works in every state. The company I use is called Able Leasing. As far as I know, they're only work in New Jersey, Connecticut, and Florida. But anyway, if you go to that aggregator, there probably is more. It will go out to bid. You definitely want to get multiple bids. I got, out of however many companies it was, I got at least 3 different bids, and the pricing was astronomically different. 2 out of the 3 bids, it actually would not have been worth going with it. The third bid, I explained to you that they charged me 2.5%, but I saved 1.7. It was a no-brainer. But that information is out there.
Thank you, Sean. Next question. How do I estimate? You know what? This one, the last few are really about sales projections, which is a different one. So I'm going to go back to what was just asked here in the chat.
I saw something pop up, but I didn't read it.
Okay, well, I'll read it to you. It says, when we add machinery and we have updated the spreadsheet with that new machine cost, should we then also adjust our labor times for job proposals by tracking the labor process of the new machine and adjusting for the possible labor savings of the new machines? Or do we leave the labor times alone and pocket the time savings?
That is a fantastic question, and there's a couple of different answers for it. So obviously the whole concept of adding a new machine or updating the machine is, once you recover, there's obviously downtime to swap out these. So your time is going to dip down. It's going to take you longer as you're transitioning over. But the whole concept is that once you are set up and running, your time is going to be quicker. So the answer is yes, you absolutely want to track what the differential is. But if you have an improvement, you don't want to lower your pricing unless you have to get the work. And the second part, this is leading into the, I don't even know if this question was asked, I think it might have been asked, is how much profit do you put on there? The reason you don't want to deduct the hours is every person's going to be different. Every person, meaning every person, every company owner, every company's location, what their product is, and who their clients are going to be different. But conceptually, it's the same for all of us. You want to evaluate and try to get as much above and beyond your cost for every job to make a profit while still getting the job. You obviously don't want to price so high that you don't get enough work coming in the door, or you are so high that you earn a reputation for being that high that people don't even bother following up with you. There's a gray area there. You want to maximize your profits. But anyway, circling back to this question. So absolutely, you definitely want to track your hours. There should be an improvement over time. But you also got to remember is that when you do put a new machine in, there's going to be your costs are going to go up because your total investment is now up. There's going to be the cost of the machine, the electrical, the airlines, the dust collection. There's going to be all the setup costs, and then the actual cost of the machine. Same thing done over that 5-year span. So even though there's going to be a cost savings in the total time that goes into that process, your actual costs theoretically would be going up simultaneously. So you would not lower your prices. You don't ever lower your prices if you can get it. You're going to leave money on the table. But like I said, there's a little finesse, there's a little gray area. The more your time you're in the business, the better you know your clients. The better you pre-qualify your clients, and that's very important. That's why we're to the trade only. Everybody's pre-qualified, so we have a very high close rate. So we're probably at a scale of 1 to 10 out of bids. We're probably 10 companies were to bid a job. We're probably like the 7th highest, not the highest, but we're one of the higher ones out there. That should answer that question.
All right, thank you, Sean. Another one came in related to sales here. So before we get into your sales, what % of sales do you try to take home as the owner every year?
So the way I take a look at that, I do a set amount because I wear a couple of hats. It's all together. Basically, my goal for my own salary is to be over 100. I'm happy at about 120,000. That's for everything: sales, CEO, CFO, all those kind of hats. But with that said, previously I did have sales reps, and what I paid them was 10% of the gross sale. But my expectations, there's different parts of sales. You can have somebody who's a hunter and try to get leads in, and then you can have a closer, and then you could have a separate project manager that runs that. For the 10% that I was paying, or I would expect to pay somebody if I did switch back to that, an independent salesperson, I would expect them to be doing all three. I would expect them to be going out and getting the leads that obviously I'd be working with them to get. I would expect them to do the close. I would expect them to be the point of contact for all communication throughout the project, so they leave my time, and most importantly, the production people's time, free to produce. There are companies that pay less, 5%, if they're just going in and closing a sale and then handing it off to a separate project manager. And then there's also the hunters, the people who bring leads in, but then you have to close yourself. So for them, it hasn't happened in a while, but I would pay 2%. If somebody brought a lead into me that there was just no way I would normally get, they bring a lead to me and do the introduction, and then I take over, they would be paid 2% fee out of the gross sale. Everybody's going to be different.
Thank you, Sean. That makes sense. The next question, which is on screen, is, how do you estimate the sales number for the next year in order to price correctly? And that's the $1 million question,
Right. So your minimum, as a minimum, your goal should be your minimum sales dollar plus an additional 25%. Because that 25% is going to do one of two things. It's either going to be 25% of your profit. And remember, the whole thing I talked about is there's so many things that you can account for, but there's still things that are going to go wrong. So out of that 25% growth margin, there are going to be problems you're going to need to fix and overcome. There's going to be costs involved in there. But every year, you should be taking a look at a sales increase, at least a goal. Not that you're going to hit it. As long as you hit your minimum or over, you're still okay because you're not losing money. But with that said, so basically what you want to do is you want to take your previous 12 months. There may be an anomaly here because of the pandemic recently. What you'd want to go would be to the 12 months before that. So from maybe March of last year to February of this year to get an actual more realistic of what the last 12 months were. And your goal should be a minimum of 25% above that. And that number, like I said, the minimum from last year should be, hopefully it is, more than what your costs were to operate. If your minimum from last year plus 25% still doesn't meet your minimum, then you need to increase that minimum to cover your costs. Your minimum needs to be coverage of costs plus a profit. Whichever one of those two higher numbers, that's the way you need to calculate your numbers. With that said, that's going to circle all the way back to the first question, to how many employees. Every company is going to have a minimum amount of sales they need to make and a minimum amount of employees to produce that amount of work. If you're not hitting those numbers and you need to increase sales, and to increase sales, you need to add employees, there's going to be a transition phase where you need to price jobs to get the work in the door, but you're not going to be quite have enough production going out the door to be actually making the true profit is. But the premise is, that the goal is that you have to do is you need to make that transition. You need to drive through that to get to the point where you can sustain and maintain your minimum amount of employees and your minimum amount of sales to do that.
Thank you, Sean. I think the point is it's a moving target for everything. You know, you got to figure out what works best to get those numbers you need.
Correct. The simple answer is your sales numbers for next year at an absolute minimum need to be all those costs that we went over at a minimum. If you do that, you can go to the next year. You could work through a recession, through a downtime, through some problems on a project. If you maintain that over a long period of time, you're wasting your time. I at a previous seminar, last seminar, I made this point here. There's only so much effort. It may not be sustainable. You may not be in the right market. If you're not in the right market, you got to change markets. You may be located in an area that doesn't support the cost of your job. You need to sell outside your market. But the point is, for all the money you have invested, if I took all the money I invested in my company in the past 20-something years, and I invested that into mutual funds, I'd actually probably be retired by now. And you should be taking a look at it the same way. You need to be paying all your bills, making a good personal salary, having comfort zone in the business to be able to upgrade, but you need to be making profits above and beyond that, because its reality is this should be driving the money to pay your bills now, but also setting you up for retirement in the future. And if you're not doing that, if you can't meet those goals for whatever reason, after you've exhausted every avenue of trying to make a profit and changing markets and making improvements, not to be glib, but you need to close up and maybe evaluate something else, because it's not worth 5-10 years of making that investment and not making any kind of return.
Thank you, Sean. That's exactly correct. Okay, next question. What are the common markup percentages? I assume it's different when you sell directly to a builder or when you sell to a designer. How do you know the correct markup percentages so that make a profit but don't undersell myself?
Excellent question. A lot of different answers on that. So as was stated in the question, we sell directly to the market. So there are a lot of variables that typically can get out of hand that are taken care of by those professionals that I work with or through. So I could charge less of a markup. So everybody's going to be different. These are my numbers. They're going to be different for you. My minimum markup is 25% on a project. On the other end of the spectrum, when I quote, and it's very rare, but when I do quote unquote retail numbers, if I was to work directly with the client with no middleman, and I got to handle anything, my minimum markup is going to be 50%. Okay. But if you want to take a look at it in this way, if you take a look at any major manufacturers, not the CMA is typically represents a smaller production shop who sells directly to the consumer, either direct to the consumer or through professional to consumer. There's also wholesale and retail. If you take a look at the big national manufacturers, their markups are very low because they're selling through a separate showroom, and then that showroom takes all responsibility. When you're that route, when you're a true wholesale and you're taking out all those variables in the field, if there's any mistakes made out in the field, that's awesome, because the production facility is being paid twice, because once you place an order and you sign off on that order, there are no changes. So then the company is only responsible for the efficiencies within the company for production, and that's it. So basically, the more risk you take, the more hand-holding, your highest markup is going to be working directly with the end consumer with no middleman. Okay, that's going to be your highest markup. the more, if you're working with a professional who's doing a lot of the hand holding and working with you to squash problems before they arise, there's going to be a lower discount. If you're a true wholesaler, it's going to be less because somebody else is taking all the risk out in the field. And then there probably isn't anybody. There may be some people who are selling online. Maybe people are just buying products. I don't think there are. You could be even a lower margin. With that said, there's also, I always had my production company, but years ago, I had a retail business where I was a reseller, just like I was mentioning before. I was a reseller for some major brands, North American brands. My markup on reselling other people's turnkey product was a minimum of 40%. My goal was 70%, but it's called keystone pricing. If I was working to the end user, it would be double. If it cost me $20,000 to buy product wholesale, I would sell it for $40,000 to cover all my expenses and profits. So everybody's going to be different. Just know that the more you take responsibility, the more you need to upcharge. So basically, to answer your question, the range is from 25 to 100%. But 25, in my mind, 25% would be your minimum, because you're never, even if you've been in business for 25, 30, 40 years, you may internally have the best systems possible and the best machinery, be very highly productive, but you're never going to overcome those hard variables and soft variables that we discussed before. You're never going to account for all of them. So they're still going to come into play. And at a 25% minimum, you can overcome short-term and mid-term hurdles.
Thank you, Sean. And that's like that previous question we talked about. With, it's a sliding scale based on how all the other numbers come out.
Correct.
All right. Yeah, this is again the $1 million question. I understand all the concepts correctly, but in order to get jobs, I still need to be competitive. How do I know the right price to be in?
So the right price falls from your minimum break-even cost, covering all your bills, to the sky is the limit. How tight is the market? How competitive is the market? As I mentioned before, I don't bid high production, low profit work because that's not my market. That's not what we're set up for. And I'm not there. We focus on the residential because residential is more about the emotional aspect of it. And the best client is a residential homeowner who has high expectations and understands, who knows the truth about themselves. Excuse me, they're willing to pay a very big premium. So the profit margins can get very high on that kind of work. With that said, the other side of that coin is they could also be the worst client. When you have a client that has those high expectations, but doesn't realize that they have that, they don't respect that, and they're going to be a big problem for you down the road. They're going to be nitpicking everything, and they could really eat the profit margins. So the right price is your absolute minimum break even, which should be the lowest you ever sell at. If you can't sell a job for what it costs you to build, then you shouldn't build it at all. The more you can't not make money on a job and make it up with volume. Okay, you're just going to drive yourself out of business quicker. Quick sidebar. This is going back to the recession. So there was a CMA member who's no longer a member because he got into a different industry. He moved out to a different state. He was in Connecticut. He was in New York. I was in New Jersey. I was sent the job to bid. After I was sent the job to bid, they asked me if I could do any better on my numbers, and they sent me a set of revised plans. The revised plans actually had my buddy's logo on there, and I called him up, and I don't even remember the prices were for the job. He bid a job for, I knew it was for less than what it cost, and I told him that, and he said, Sean, he's like, well, I had nothing coming in the door. I figured it'd be better to lose some money and get this job worked through than not make any money at all. And I explained to him, you're not going to make any money at all. And he actually told me that the third bidder was somebody who literally was in his industrial complex. It was another shop. That shop owner bid less than him. That shop owner bid, it was barely over the cost of materials. He had that same mindset. I didn't take the job. I didn't lower my prices. My buddy didn't get the job because the other shop was even lower. I spent that time not working on that job, driving in more sales, going out and beating the street. You can't ever sell a job and expect to make it up in volume. You're just going to drive yourself out of business longer. If you take work and you bid it, jobs with no profit margin, you're going to spend all your time producing that and managing that job and not out in the street. So you're going to have the short stint of either no profits or, actually worst case scenario, losing money. And the entire time that production is done, you're not going to be out there driving in the jobs. When that job is done, there's not going to be the next profitable job sitting there to come in the door and make that up. So don't ever do work for less than what it costs you. Always do your best to try to make as much money as possible and still get the job.
Exactly, Sean. Otherwise, it's just a hobby, not a business, right?
Exactly. You could do it if you're doing it for the love of business. If you're doing it because you feel that, you got to strip the ego. And like I said, all this advice, remember, it goes back to me making mistakes. Okay, when I got into business, oh man, I was a love woodworker, grain matching. I would spend so much time on jobs, but it didn't make a difference to me because I only had 1 or 2 employees, and I would work 60, 70, 90 hours a week. I was young. I didn't care. I still made the money in the end because the money was all coming to me. But when you worked it out to an hourly rate, it was an extremely low hourly rate. Strip out the ego, strip out all the other BS. You got to take it. This is a business. It's an investment. When you take a look at what you have invested in not only the actual dollar cost, but your time, you have to turn a profit. If you don't, then do it as a hobby, get into something else to pay your bills, and take all that money that you normally would be investing in the business and invest it into long-term investments so you can retire. Strip out the emotions. All decisions are made based on a business.
Yep. Well, I know that pricing, in general, the right price and pricing for your market and everything is a huge issue. And the FDMC magazine does an annual pricing survey. And I don't know, if you haven't looked at it before, I encourage you to look at it. And I think it's coming up pretty soon in the next issue of the report. But it's absolutely mind-boggling because the results are so dramatically different. What they do is they send out proposals to like 20 different companies and just ask them to do their pricing for this project. It's just for free. It's a random sampling. And they get back 20 dramatically different answers. And it's all across the board: region, location, material availability, everything. They can't figure out why it's so different. So it's hard. And so you obviously, those of you who are on the webinar, understand that, or you wouldn't be listening in today. But just to reiterate that.
I'm going to follow up on that, and that goes back to what I was saying before. If you live in an area, if you live in a economically depressed or recessed area that there isn't a market there to sell, you could still operate out of there, but you need to sell. There's a CMA member, or a couple guys who are up in the mid Dakotas and stuff like that, and they actually have to drive out to like Denver, major cities. There's a company that sells a lot of work out in California, and they make a delivery every couple of months out there. If that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do. There are jobs where we build a kitchen for somebody. We build, let's see, the most expensive, I'll use a kitchen because that's probably most commonalities. We did a kitchen that was just shy of $200,000. It was 180. But the reality is, for 180, I could go to Louisiana or Texas out in the boonies and buy an entire house for that. And I take a look at houses that are on the market right now that literally could not be built in northern New Jersey. So when you take a look at what all those bids are, you do need to take that into play. Every market's going to be different. Typically, the more urban areas, the more city areas, the metropolitan areas, the higher that dollar amount's going to be. That's what's going to be. With that said, also, this is something, whether you're in that market yet or not, I can tell you this just by learning it. I've actually lost jobs by being too low. It's not always about the money, okay? When I've I've lost jobs in the commercial world and I've lost jobs in the residential world from being too low. And the reason the feedback I got was from a residential aspect of it, when you come in as not the highest number, people will think that you're not good enough to do their job or you're not accounting for something. And that's a risk to them that they don't want to take. And they actually want to go with the higher number. So there's actually a way with salesmanship that you can flip that to your advantage, okay? You can cast doubt on other bidders. Well, why are their numbers so low? Are they not accounting for something? Or are they not going to give you that same quality? So that's part of the salesmanship there. And the same goes for the commercial world. Commercial world's all about, it doesn't matter what the business is, they need to open by a certain time. They set the numbers on when they need to open, and especially because of mostly, like I said, the commercial work we do is typically in the food industry. We do bars, restaurants, excuse me, bakery. One of my clients, it's always about getting open on time. So we've lost commercial jobs because we didn't bid enough because they assumed we didn't have the money in there that we needed to have in there to meet their demands of opening on time. So there's a way to flip the script on that if you are in the correct market, the more experience you have. And that's going to sidebar into sales training, which is a whole nother topic altogether. But there's nothing set in stone.
Thanks, Sean. We did get another question in to clarify. Okay, you said you account for $120,000 for yourself, and the question is, does that include profit, or is profit in addition to that?
Profit would be in addition to that. Your goal is always to make above and beyond. 120. If in my, like I said, going back to sales price, where I'm in Northern New Jersey, whether I worked in Northern New Jersey or Manhattan area, where we are, if with my experience right now, if I work for another company in the same exact industry or a similar industry where I could adapt my working ability, I would definitely be able to make that kind of money because going back to the sales question about 10%, there's no doubt I could sell $1.2 million for another company and earn that money because I do more than that for myself right now. And I don't even come anywhere close to working 40 hours a week. So it's also, I believe the question popped up. I think it was Peter Russell. I think he's also in New Jersey. It's also very expensive to live in New Jersey. So your cost of living, all the numbers are going to be different for everybody. Okay, if going back to the same thing about Louisiana, Texas for a house. Okay, houses in my area are real estate's extremely expensive. There is no more land left. The only new construction there is old properties, old buildings being knocked down, and either monster houses being put up, or sometimes builders buying up multiple properties and putting up condo towers. That's all there is. So the market has driven the cost of living extremely high up here. So I need to make more money than I would need to make if I was in a very low cost living area. So that's going to vary for everybody. But back to the original question, 120. That is what I pay myself. That's what I expect to pay myself as a salary. And this question's already even been asked, but I'm going to answer these questions. I set up that money automatically gets drawn out of my account every month. All my bills are paid automatically out of that because I deserve to pay. I don't wait for the end of a job to get paid. Then after that, once I get that, and then either quarterly or whenever I want it, if there's a big ticket item that I want to do, we want to go on vacation or something like that, I'm not accounting for my regular salary or my regular bill, I will pull that money out of the business. There's another time I did this seminar, and there's another guy who's actually quote unquote competitor of mine. He's a buddy of mine. His comment is, I take money out of the business every chance I get. Take that money out because if it sits in the company, you're always going to find something to spend it on. Some kind of improvement that you don't actually need to do, you can get away with, where you're at. But you should be paying your salary. It needs to be paid for what you are worth for working for somebody else, or whether you had to pay somebody for that. And above and beyond that, there needs to be. I'm not going to say should. I'm going to use the word needs to be. Okay. Because of the numbers that you wrote down, your investment, mine was over $1 million, yours may be a couple $100,000. Monster companies are going to be in the multiple millions of dollars. If you took that same amount of money and put that into a retirement account and didn't touch it, didn't take any responsibility for what that is, you're going to get, I think they actually just updated the other day, 8% return rate, 8% annual return. If you're not making your salary plus a minimum of 8% return on your total investment every year, then you got to ask yourself if it's worth it. Is it a business? Is it a profession and an investment, or is it a hobby? That's the difference.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, I mean, the salary needs to be like the base salary. Everything else obviously is in addition. As you said, there's another question out there about number of employees in your office to support production, and what positions do they hold?
All right, so in-house, my quote-unquote office people, it's myself, sales, oversight of the whole company. It is John, he's my engineer. He does all the field measuring, all the production paperwork, and Mark. About half of Mark's time, like I said, half of Mark is producing on the floor, running the CNC, and ripping hardwoods, primary processing hardwoods, and sending that out to the other employees. I have no other office staff. I don't have a showroom, so I don't need somebody staffing it. We're not a high volume call center. All the calls come to me, so I don't need somebody taking calls. And then I have a separate bookkeeper and I have a separate accountant. So I'm a smaller operation. I don't need those. Those are going to scale for everybody, okay? But you want to have, obviously you want to have the minimum amount it takes you to operate. The more people you have in your office, in your overhead costs, the more employees you need to have, more billable employees you need to have to spread their costs over them. So everybody's going to be different. If you have a showroom, if you're open to the public, if you do a lot of advertising, if you're a higher volume, if your close rate is lower, you're going to need maybe possibly separate people doing proposals, especially in the bigger, if you're doing commercial work. There are companies that you're going to need a standalone person who's doing nothing but estimates because your close rate may only be 10 to 15%. So it's going to vary for everybody based on what that is, but it needs to be the minimum amount because if you get too top heavy, you're not going to have enough production people to spread those costs around, and you're not going to be your price point is going to be so high you won't be able to sell anything.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, that's definitely something that varies based on the company size and your needs. The one other question that was posted in the forums, and I didn't put it on the screen, was about software to do your pricing, your quotes. And that, you said you did it through QuickBooks. I know a lot of other people use their software like KCD, Cabinet Vision, Microvalum, Mosaic, whatever you have. And I know there is no right or wrong answer for that. And I think that could be a whole nother webinar in and of itself, but I didn't know if you had anything to comment on that, Sean.
Sure I do. There are a lot of companies who have KCD or Cabinet Vision. A lot of the software, design softwares, have pricing built into it. You're obviously you're gonna take everything we reviewed right now, update that pricing and put it in there, and you can draw out a job or drag and drop the components into a space to price it out. We don't do that. I will not field measure a job. I will not do drawings unless I've already made the sale. So to do that, I came up with the pricing, and the way I came up with the pricing, and I do it with QuickBooks, is it's not this spreadsheet. This spreadsheet is more advanced than what I first put together, but I figured out all my calculations, and then I put those numbers into a spreadsheet. And there is a way, it's way too detailed for me to explain here, but if somebody needs assistance with that, I can explain that. There's a way that you can update in that and then import that into QuickBooks, and that is part of your item list. And so for me, everything that we build is broken down into components or markups for finishing and stuff like that. It's in the item list in QuickBooks, and I just not drag and drop, it's drop down menus. I click through all the items and it tallies everything for me, because I don't work for free. I'm not going to produce drawings for free. I'm not going to come out and do a field meet or a field measure unless the job is sold. And when I mean sold, that means they either got the verbal, and I may not have the check in hand, but I got the verbal commitment that said, hey, I got your price. We're good to go. Let's meet out in the field. We'll give you a deposit and we'll get started. So I'll go out for that. If that doesn't happen, I'm not going to do it. That's for new clients, okay? Because I have a lot of repeat clients, if I get a request from a builder, a designer, or an architect that I work with, we have already established a rapport. I know that they're not wasting my time. And typically, I will go out there because predominantly 9 out of 10 times, those jobs, it's not even an open bid. There aren't even other companies bidding on the project. This is what would be called a negotiated bid. We're discussing what the scope of the job is, the reality of what it's going to cost, and then evaluate. If the cost is more than they have a budget for, then we'll go through and explain how we can achieve what their true goals are, what their core goals are for the project, and can we meet those needs, and then you decide, can we do things later or just put them off if they don't matter. So everybody's going to price different, but you should, the point is you need to know your numbers so you can price. And that's how I do for me. I know a lot of people do the method of drawing out a job, and especially now, if you're training that, it's very quick. If you choose to do that, go ahead and do that. With that said, I will tell you this: do not release the drawings. Release the numbers if that's what you need to do to price a job, but do not release the drawings, okay? Because guys like me, when they get sent those drawings, I'm going to give a discount to the client because somebody already designed the job for me. So you're hurting yourself. And it's not just me, anybody would do it. You're going to do the same thing. If you get a request from a client and they bring you a set of drawings from another company, if you're not, you should be taking that into consideration. Somebody's already done a lot of legwork already, and that's going to save you time. So that's going to give you a better competitive advantage to maybe bid the job for less and to get it, because you're not going to have to put so much time in that. So you're doing nobody any help. You're only hurting yourself if you release your drawings. But that's the answer.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, that's a huge point of discussion too, about whether you charge for drawings or not. And yes, I agree with you for sure. That is all I have for the questions that have been posted. Sean, did you have anything else you wanted to say as follow-up?
I'm going to say this, make a comment, and then just one other thought there. So I've been doing this presentation that's actually more than 10 years. I did this math. First time I did this presentation was 2007. In the past 13 years, there have been a handful, maybe 5 to 7 people who have come up to me after they've gone through this program and came up with their own numbers and either said, I can't charge that much, or my market can't handle that price. And I went through and explained again that these are all factual things that it costs you in your business. Those 5 to 7, it's at least 7 actually now, over 13 years, but every single person that came up to me and said that and didn't listen to what I said and actually charged less, every single one of them is no longer in business, okay? There is no tricking reality. Everything we went over is factual and needs to be covered. So that's just one follow-up I want to say with that. And then the other follow-up is, I know it's been reiterated multiple times. If you have more questions, there may be more things that come up. But now, today, tomorrow, next month, next year, number one, I would say post those questions up in that forum there. So because there's going to be common questions and common answers that are going to help other people as well. But that's the whole point for anybody new here who joined specifically to get this information. This is what this organization is about, and this is my little sales pitch. You should be getting the value out of that. If you're involved in events like this and talking to other shop members who think like me, we're not competitors. We're all here to help each other out. You will get way more value out of it than what the dues are if you get involved, and I hope you'll join. That's it.
Thank you, Sean. I wanted to do one more pitch for next week's, the next series on job costing. It's a 3-week series again, just like this one, with the 2 parts and then the Q&A like we had today. So I will post those links in the forums and in the email I'm going to send you as a follow-up with the video of this, and again, the link to the forums to continue this discussion over time as you continue to work with the numbers and have more questions. Sean, I want to thank you for participating in this and for all of your knowledge and expertise in this area. It's greatly appreciated.
It was my pleasure.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And we'll connect again next week, hopefully.